This time, France, World Cup 1994. Look at what you could have won.
'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, making the case where it doesn't belong for Oxford United, and joining me, King of the Day, to Jamie Rooney.
I think the bullseye reference is really good. I don't know how many people are going to get it, but I appreciate that. Because I think 1993, the year in question we're going to focus on, bullseye would have been prime time Sunday TV, wouldn't it? Yeah, it's in the sweet spot. So good reference, Graham. I like that. I'm pretty excited about this one. This is, I like the fact, just coming into the glory of a World Cup, we're lucky enough to have a brilliant guest tonight that's going to talk through the inglorious glory of not going to a World Cup.
Yes, this is the latest in our kind of World Cup fever warm-up session. We've done US 94 with the excellent Michael Lewis taking us through the incredible tournament. We're talking to Steve Double about England, Mexico 86. So we're trying to focus in on those last World Cups, which were held in Mexico and the US. But this one's a brilliant, it's a great story. And it's so up our street because we're going back to US 94, but we're going to cover a team that didn't make it. And we've got a fabulous guest joining us. Welcome, James Bennett. Hi, James.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on. Great to be here.
You've just produced a book on this, a book called No Show, which is basically about the teams that don't make it to the World Cup in spectacular fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked 24 teams from history. It had to be 24 because it had to be a good World Cup number. And 32 was too many. So I did have 32 lined up. And then my publisher said, no, that word count that you've suggested might be a bit too long. I think you might want to revise it down a little bit. So I had to chop a few teams out, which was like severing one of my arms at that point because I was very invested in all the teams I'd picked, but particularly this France team because I wanted to pick a whole mix for the book of teams from the bigger footballing nations that somehow managed to trip up and not quite make it on certain occasions, and mixed with some of the smaller nations, the underdogs, who get really, really close and then it doesn't quite work out for them. France obviously is in the former camp and is one of the most famous examples, the example that inspired me to start writing about teams that didn't qualify for the World Cup, to be honest, because it's just a really interesting mix of players and people involved in it, the circumstances in which it all played out, particularly the way it all ends. One of the most incredible stories in his international football, but also one that's been kind of forgotten because France now, they're the big juggernaut of international football. They're churning out great players all the time. They always go into the major tournament as one of the favourites, if not the favourite. And it's hard to remember back to a time where they didn't qualify for 2 World Cups in a row. And even though they had the talent, it just didn't quite come together for them.
It's strange because you're absolutely right. This period is bookended by France being really, really good beforehand and then really, really good ultimately afterwards. But actually coming into 1994, They've really struggled with that kind of what to do without Platini. And to begin with, they try using Platini.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I'd like to think of this as like a 10-year story. It starts with France winning the Euros in really convincing fashion in 1984 on home soil. And he has an incredible tournament. He scores more than a goal a game. And it looks like France basically are the best team in the world and Platini is the best player in the world. Now, from there, they have a very difficult qualifying for 1986 World Cup, but they get through, play pretty well in the finals in 86. But Platini's carrying injuries, not quite on the same level. And then they play Brazil, they knock out the great Brazil of Tele Santana. But it's almost like a heavyweight boxing match where both boxers have left so much on the table that they're never quite the same again. Tele Santana's Brazil team kind of fall apart after that, like Zico retires and some of the other great players retire. And it's the same with France. They get knocked out in the semi-finals by quite a middling West Germany team who have somehow got that far. No one quite knows how they managed to do that, considering the strength of the teams in that tournament. Gérard and Maxime Bossis, who were two of the key players, and particularly Gérard, because Gérard was part of that Le Carré Magique, the magic square midfield. They both retire. And then, almost like as a sort of aftershock, France go into Euro 88 qualifying and have an absolute disaster. They win only one game. They lose to Norway. That's not the Norway of the 90s, let alone the Norway of today. That was when Norway was semi-pros. They lose to East Germany. They lose to the USSR. Henri Michel is the manager at the time. He's trying to sort of bring through younger players, but he can't quite find the right formula. He brings in this young player called Eric Cantona, who in a TV interview after he got dropped calls him a sac à merde, which I don't think needs a huge amount of translation. So Cantona then gets banned, and then she'll have to start a World Cup qualifying for 1990. In 1988, France reached the nadir, which is a 1-1 draw with Cyprus, after which Henri Michel is fired. Michel Platini comes back. Results start to pick up a bit. They miss out on 1990 qualifying by a point to Scotland. But then they go on this ridiculous unbeaten run of 19 matches under Platini's management. Suddenly things are looking really good. They get to the Euros in 92. And that's kind of where the story really starts to get interesting, because by now they've got a lot of the players who are going to play in this team we're going to talk about. They don't do as well. I think Platini has said himself, they kind of started to run out of steam. It almost got a bit nervous from going on such a long unbeaten run. Ironically, that unbeaten run, do you know who ended that?
No.
It was Graham Taylor's England.
It was
in a pre-Euros friendly. Because obviously they played in the Euros, but they drew 0-0. England had beaten them 2-0. That 19-match unbeaten run, which I think was a record at the time, or certainly was by far and away the longest unbeaten run active at the time. Yeah, ended by Graham Taylor. And so they stumbled through the Euros, go out in the first round, and Platini quietly disappears off, and his assistant Gérard Houllier takes over.
Houllier is fascinating, isn't he? Because he's obviously a really established name in the UK from what he goes on to achieve. But outside of French football and probably Jamie, you would probably know who he was. He's basically been part of that French kind of football federation, I guess, or behind the scenes as almost like a coach technocrat kind of thing.
Yeah, he made his name managing PSG in the 80s and then gets brought into the national setup. And this kind of links back to that whole period of decline after Platini retires in 1987. There is this realization after they failed to qualify for Euro 88 that they need to sort out player development. They can't just keep relying on these older players who have played so well in the past, who were all starting to get phased out of the team. So Houllier is basically tasked with, as far as I can tell, with setting up or playing a key role in setting up Clairefontaine, the National Football Academy, which is the first time that a major football nation had built a sort of proper academy system for the whole country. So Houllier is the technical director of the FFF at the time. He then becomes the assistant coach to Platini as well. And they kind of were putting all the groundwork in place for what would, the fruits of which would be start to be seen 10 years later when Thierry Henry comes into the team. But that's getting way ahead. But yeah, he's very much like, as you say, a technocrat behind the scenes. And eventually, once Platini steps down, he steps up to be the manager from 1992 with the view to getting France to the World Cup in 1994.
Yeah, his background as a player isn't much of note, really. Probably less than Arsène Wenger. But he does, it's quite noted, though, he does win the very first championship with Paris Saint-Germain. So he's the first coach, because Paris Saint-Germain are a fairly new club. I think they originated in the 70s. And Houllier goes there when they're not really the big team in France. Marseille, Monaco are the bigger teams. And so winning that first championship kind of puts him on the map in terms of like, this is an up-and-coming manager. And he'd been around as a manager about 10 years before that as well, before he wins that championship with Paris. But yeah, you're right, Graham. He kind of, after his spell that we're going to get into, he disappears from public life, but doesn't disappear from the French football life, as James has outlined.
And the mission, of course, is to qualify for the World Cup, which is going to be in the US for the first time. Now, as we know, I mean, that's a simple enough tournament to qualify. It's not like England won't manage it.
Or Wales.
Wales, yes.
I can't say too much about that. Exactly. It's, of course, before the days of playoffs. So it's two from the group who qualify. The main contenders that they're up against in the group are Sweden, who have just got to the semi-finals of the Euros in 92. Obviously, getting out of that group ahead of France, but that was on home soil for them. And Bulgaria, who they've been knocking on the door for a while. Bulgaria kind of dip in and out of World Cups. They now have a world-class player in Hristo Stoichkov and a good team around him, but they hadn't qualified for the Euro 92. They hadn't qualified for the 1990 World Cup either. You've also got Austria in there, who had qualified for the 1990 World Cup, who are always dangerous. And you've got the wild cards of the group, who are Finland, who are kind of always threatening to get good, but hadn't at that point. And Israel, who are just moved into UEFA from their brief stint in Oceania, which is still one of the most absurd things to happen in football. The stint that they had there where they nearly qualified on behalf of Oceania. And so they're back into the European system. And I kind of describe them as a bit of a wild card because they've not got much of a track record against the other European teams. No one really knows how good they are. And they've not got many particularly standout players, certainly at the time. The most famous at the time would have been Ronnie Rosenthal, who was playing for Liverpool. But basically, you kind of think, okay, there's no Minnow in this group. There's no San Marino because they're in with England. And a lot of the other smaller nations like Andorra and Liechtenstein hadn't entered yet. It's before the breakup of Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. It's a tricky group in the sense that there are no really bad teams, but you'd still think that France, who have recently gone on that ridiculous unbeaten run and have talent and pedigree, they should be getting one of those two spots. There should be no issue for them, really.
Bulgaria are a funny sign, aren't they? Because at this point, they're actually quite good at qualifying for World Cups and pretty disastrous at winning any games in World Cups. I think they hadn't won any of their 16 World Cups games before this, but they had made it into 5 or 6 tournaments. So they do enough to qualify, but never enough really to threaten. And Israel, I mean, we'll come on to Israel obviously in a bit, but the wild card sums them up quite well because any team that has Ronnie Rosenthal in them has a wild card element, doesn't it? That is literally anything. You could get anything out of him.
Weirdly, I think Ronnie Rosenthal played in my first ever home Torquay match because he had a stint at Watford in the third tier. And we played them in the FA Cup in late 97, early 98. I can't remember when it was. Yeah, that was my first ever home game. I'm pretty sure he was there under Graham Taylor, weirdly.
I mean, Ronnie Rosenthal, I only remember there are 2 games from. One is a glorious hat-trick he scores for Liverpool, and one obviously is the miss. And I'm sure he played lots of sort of relatively ordinary games, okay games, scored the odd one, contributed. But for me, it's famine and feast with Ronnie.
Yeah, that's the thing. You get a lot of these international teams around this time that are kind of built around, not built around, but they kind of got 1 or 2 really good players, and that's it. You know, it feels like it's a particular trend of that era. We see it quite a lot with Bulgaria, with Stoichkov, obviously, is a good example.
And would Finland have had Jori Litmanen at that stage, or is that a little bit later?
Possibly he was just coming in.
Close, because he was in the Ajax team, wasn't he, in the 90s? So, yeah, quite possibly. Good question, Graham.
Every now and then.
He made his debut for Finland in 1989.
Wow.
At the age of 18-ish. So yeah, he would have been playing in that Finland team. My first international was Wales playing Finland at the Millennium Stadium. At that point, Finland had a bit more of a complete team. They had Sami Hyppie there, Jonas Kolka, who was really good on the wing, Iksu Patalainen, giant Hibernian striker. So yeah, that's the better era of Finnish football. I think it's all still coming together at this point.
So that French side going into this, you do have a sort of connection with the successful team of the 86 through Papin, who I guess was sort of involved in that era.
Yeah, Jean-Pierre Papin's a weird one because he's never fully trusted by Henri Michel. He plays very much a bit part role in 86 behind Yannick Stoppera, and that continues through the initial Euro 88 qualifying. Like Michel just tries so many different players. He's throwing so much at the wall at that point to see what sticks. And for whatever reason, Papin's dipping in and out. And then it's not until Platini takes over that suddenly he blossoms into this great striker. By 92, he's one of the world's most expensive players. He's the captain of the team. He's very much what they think is going to be the focal point of the attack, although it turns out that his strike partner ends up probably playing even better as he starts to make a name for himself in world football. But I think the thing that always strikes me about this France team is this strength and depth throughout the entire team. In defence, you've got Laurent Blanc, who comes in partway through the campaign. They start with Basile Boli, obviously a great defender for Marseille, but he gets superseded by Marcel Desailly, who plays a lot. They have Didier Deschamps in midfield, who's one of the great holding midfielders. And they've got this kind of rotating cast of attackers they bring in, including David Ginola, who plays his role on and off behind Cantona and Papin up front. It's a team that very much evolves over the course of the campaign into one that's quite effective.
And the system, I think that Houllier is playing as well. Oh, they just switch it. Occasionally it's 4-4-2. They got Laurent Blanc in there, beautiful football player. He kind of holds as a sweeper. And I think sometimes you've got Roche and Desailly who play in front of him. And then he's got almost like the fullbacks playing as wing backs, which allows him to have Cantona and Ginola playing off Jean-Pierre Papin, who's that focal point. And then Deschamps is just in midfield doing what he needs to do. Also, player that gets overlooked, Francois as well. He was quite effective at this particular moment. I mean, he wouldn't have looked out of place at a World Cup. He plays in quite a few of these games as well, doesn't he, James? I think
he's one of the few players who's pretty much ever present throughout the entire run, because he also has a game at sweeper. I was trying to work out earlier today. You go on the tactics websites now, or the old lineup websites now, and I don't think they fully understand the concept of the sweeper because they're built around modern football tactics. Well, actually, no, it's not quite like that. Houllier starts off with the 5 at the back sweeper and then kind of changes about halfway through the campaign to be the sort of midfield diamond 4-4-2. And yes, Rosie actually does a game at sweeper, which is very strange. I don't think he was the quickest, but he was definitely the sort of deeper lying creative player in the team alongside Deschamps, who was more of a destroyer.
Well, as Eric Cantona famously called him, the water carrier, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very dismissively. Who lifted the World Cup in '98 though? So yeah, and what also kind of interests me is that you've got Emmanuel Petit there. Obviously, again, goes on to play a really big role in '98 in midfield, and we kind of associate him as a midfielder for Arsenal as well. But he plays left back for this run. It's between him and Lizarazu. They kind of come in and out of the team. I think Lizarazu actually plays one game as a 10 as well, which is very strange. I think that kind of sets us up quite well. This is very much Houllier has his set of tactics, and he will fit the players in regardless of how familiar are with the roles, like playing Ginola up front or Lizarazu as a 10 or Petit as left back. I mean, it may be that Petit was playing as left back for his club as well. I'm not quite sure. It's very much like trying to make it work. And to Houlier's credit, he evidently is able to make it work. He clearly has an understanding of the attributes of those players and how they work well together. Though it's not necessarily always the most obvious way of getting it to work. And, they score a lot of goals. They're scoring 2 or 3 a game most of the tournament. Clearly something's working, or he finds a way of making it work over time.
Well, I don't know if he gets lucky, but he's definitely fortunate to have Cantona and Papin playing together so well. I mean, they contribute many of those goals. Cantona's just lighting up in English football at Manchester United and the birth of the Premier League. And Papin, albeit he does carry a few injuries in his time. I mean, this is a sweet spot of his career. He's in the highlight with Marcel. He's going to get his big money move to AC Milan. Marseille are champions of Europe going into this period as well. And Jean-Pierre Papin is one of the contenders for the Ballon d'Or on a regular basis during this period. So I think Houllier is quite fortunate in some sense that he's got these 2 professionals probably at the peak of their footballing brilliance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing with Cantona as well that's worth highlighting is obviously he'd become a bit ostracized from French football due to the various controversies that he'd been involved in, like his comments about Henri Michel, for instance. So, at the start of this campaign, he's gone out to Leeds. He's just won the league with Leeds, but he's not really thought of in the same vein as the great French attackers of the past. Certainly not Platini. And that's something that kind of evolves over time because it's kind of partway through the campaign that he switches over from Leeds to Man United. And the thing that I kind of picked up in the book is that he scores the winner. I don't think it's spoiling too much to say. He scores the winner against Sweden at home, which is the match that really kind of lights up their campaign because Sweden are it looks like the main contenders for top spot, gets a late winner. And I kind of realised that this has literally come at the same time, April 93, he's winning the league with Man United, to bring Man United back to the championship for the first time in many years, whilst also scoring the winning goal in a crucial qualifier where Papin is out. So it's just him carrying the team. That must be the high watermark internationally of Cantona's career. Because as we'll discuss later, things kind of go downhill from there at international level and he becomes a massive star for Man United in the Premier League, but never really breaks out beyond that.
No, it doesn't do anything in the Champions League as well, because it's at a time where European restrictions in play for foreign players you can play. So Cantona doesn't really contribute to Manchester United in the European Cup either when they compete in those competitions.
Does he infamously get subbed off in the middle of one of the games so that they can bring someone else on?
Yeah, it's quite possible. The famous one is the Barcelona away where Ferguson leaves Schmeichel and Cantona, probably the two prominent players, the two natural leaders in the team. He leaves them out the team, puts Gary Walsh in goal, and they get stuffed 4-0. Romario just has an absolute brilliant Romario performance. What you're saying though, James, and the picture I'm painting is that this is a really good French squad. It's not like a Bulgaria where pretty much most of the players are in their sweet spot and they've got this genius in Stoichkov that's kind of leading them on to things that they probably weren't expected. This French team is tasty. This French team is seen, and you mentioned their unbeaten run as well, is seen as one of the, not just to qualify for the World Cup, but one of the favourites to do well in the USA in 1994 in the finals itself.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. And I think history bears that out. These are the players who will go on to be, or a lot of them will be part of the national team for several years when France's fortunes do improve. Yes, there's kind of a bit of evolution through the rest of the 90s into the 2000s, but you've got the fundamentals there of a really good team, and you've got a manager there who we all know would go on to have great success as well in club level, having already done so at PSG, and had this kind of technical understanding of what football should be like in the 90s, setting up Clairefontaine. The pieces are all there. That's what makes this so fascinating. And for the most part, it really clicks.
Yeah.
They are playing well.
It doesn't start well. They lose their first game away in Sofia, don't they? To Bulgaria, I think. Is that right?
They go to Sofia for the first game, up against Bulgaria. Yeah, it's always tricky to go away to Eastern Europe. Yes, we know Bulgaria are a handy side, but they lose 2-0. Stoichkov scores a penalty. It's a deflected Krasimir Balakov goal. Balakov, the other great player in that Bulgarian side, I think probably one of the more underrated players in there, had a long career in the Bundesliga. His shot gets deflected, it loops over Bruno Martini, who was the long-time French goalkeeper, over the top, no way he could have saved it. It's interesting, if you look at the team at the start of this run, it's very different to what it becomes. I think Houllier does respond to that pretty well. He brings Cantona in for the next game against Austria, makes a couple of other changes to the team as well, and they beat Austria, beat Finland, and they start going on a really good run. They play Israel in Tel Aviv and they win 4-0. Things are really starting to click at this point. And that's when he starts going with the diamond midfield formation, as far as I can tell. You've got a bit more of a settled side at this point. He changes goalkeeper, so Bernard Lamar, who's at PSG, comes in. And bear in mind, all this is happening as well, to further emphasise the point on French football. Obviously, the French league has become really strong, and it's at this time then in early 1993 that Marseille win the very first Champions League. Basile Boli, who's in this France team, scores the winning goal in the final, a header from a corner, and all of a sudden French football is top of European football, and you kind of think, what's going to possibly stop them? Narrator, something does stop them.
Yeah. It's everything's not quite as it seems with Marseille, is it?
Unfair to say that the French are probably the best at stopping themselves.
Yeah. So, for context for listeners who aren't aware, obviously it emerges very soon after the end of the season that Bernard Tapie, the owner of Marseille, it hasn't necessarily been entirely above board, or he's instituted a culture within the team that isn't entirely above board, that may or may not involve bribing people to help them win, opponents specifically. I think it was the last game of the season where it's like, well, we want to win this match. Can you go easy on us so that we don't go into the Champions League final with loads of injuries, etc. And they get caught. Marseille get stripped of the championship and kicked down to the second tier of French football as a result. Their Champions League win stands, which itself is very controversial. I know, particularly with Rangers fans, because they beat Rangers in one of the previous rounds at the semi-finals. I know that's something they've never really gotten over. Understandable, really. And it kind of leaves French football in a bit of a mess. The French team is largely built around players either from Marseille or from PSG. There's already this kind of underlying tension because Marseille and PSG at this point are the biggest rivals in French football. So I've seen it alluded before, nothing ever explicit, but there is this tension in the squad between those two sets of players. And now this happens, and it's kind of a bit like Calciopoli in 2006. Things are suddenly looking good, but also there's this whole cloud going on in the background.
Yeah, this has an overshadowing effect. But France are still progressing through this group pretty well. I mean, Sweden are going okay as well. I mean, Is there optimism that they could actually win the group at this stage still?
What you find is that Bulgaria generally did start well. They did lose to Sweden, but they keep winning. And then sort of middle of 93, they start dropping points. And that lets France back in. So I think when you kind of have the double against Sweden, so they play Sweden at home in April, and then the reverse fixtures in August in the Rosunda in Stockholm. Over that course of time, but Bulgaria drop a point, 2 points for a win at this point, with a home draw to Israel, which is quite disappointing. Your man Ronnie Rosenthal scored in that one. So France, they get that late winner. Cantona scores the winner at home, and then Franck Sauzet scores a fantastic goal quite late on to give France the lead in Stockholm, and it looks like this is basically going to seal them qualification. It wouldn't quite be enough, but puts them on the brink. And then in the last minute, Martin Darlene breaks through the French defence and scores late equaliser, which is, to be fair, a draw in Sweden at this time is still a good result for France, but it's not quite the killer blow that they would have wanted. So Bulgaria and Sweden then draw when France have beaten Finland in Helsinki. So what that does is it takes you into the last two matches. France are at home in both of them, which is a pretty big advantage. They got the Parc des Princes full. They're home to Israel and then home to Bulgaria to close out the group. So basically, a win against either Israel or Bulgaria takes them to the finals. A draw at one point won't quite be enough because of the goal difference. The goal difference is quite tight. In theory, Bulgaria could still nab it. So a point isn't enough. You need to win one of those games to get through. But that is all you need to do. 2 home games, one against the team that's basically bottom of the group and hasn't won a game. And then the other one is against your rival, so you can probably see out a draw anyway.
Literally nothing could go wrong. And we will look at what does go wrong in the second half. Okay, so welcome back. France, nothing can go wrong from here. They just have to get a result. I mean, Bulgaria is their safety net. They won't need that because they've got Israel coming to town. And as we've discussed, this Israel side they're not true whipping boys of the group, but they are the closest you're going to get to it, aren't they? They are not an established football team at this stage.
They're also not always playing, and James talked about it at the top of this. Israel as a footballing nation, the men's team, have been passed from different confederations through the history of its existence. Israel as a footballing team have been messed around by UEFA and FIFA for quite some time, and other confederations. So they're back in the European pot. And up until this point, correct me if I've got this wrong, James, but I don't think they've won a game. I think they've had 2 draws and they haven't won a single game. And they've been smashed by France in Israel 4-0.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's fair to say that there was this expectation that the champagne is very much ready to be uncorked at this point in Paris. What I loved is that I recently discovered this anecdote, which is that Houllier sent a scout to watch Israel play a friendly against Romania just before this. And the scout came back with this report that said, if you don't beat these guys, you're just goats. And I don't mean that in the modern sense. I mean that in the you are useless. Do you know who that scout was?
Okay, well, it's got to be someone like Wenger or something like that.
No, it's funnier. Raymond Domenech.
Wow. What did he go on to do?
Wow. Never would have, you might have learned to be more humble at some point, or, Yeah, it has a fantastic, literally that is the attitude that they collectively all had. And Houllier went into this, named a very attacking team with Papin, Ginola and Cantona as a front three. The French Football Federation invited Pelé there. Bearing in mind, obviously, France had been awarded the 1998 World Cup by this point. So there's kind of almost this sense of we get Pelé there to announce France's big return to the world stage, given they missed out in 1990. This great team, they've been winning. This is just going to be a formality. We're going to get back on the world stage ahead of bringing the World Cup to France in 1998. Let's just say things didn't really go to plan.
No, they don't. Although, so Israel take the lead in this game. Is that right?
Yeah, Ronan Harazi gives them an early lead, but then Franck Sauzet and David Ginola score 2 really, really good long-range goals. And the Ginola goal in particular is really special. It's a classic Ginola goal. He cuts in from the left-hand side onto his right foot and smashes one in the top corner. brilliant goal, and you think, oh, that's the goal, that's the moment, the highlight reel moment to send France to the World Cup. And half time comes and goes. They're doing okay, but they're starting to get a little bit deep. And then with 7 minutes to go, there's a bit of a goal mouth scramble. And Eyal Berkovic, who's very much an unknown at this point, this is well before his Premier League days, he manages to scramble in an equaliser. So with 7 minutes to go, it's suddenly going to be a draw. And it's like, oh, that's not enough to qualify. And then it gets even worse when it's Ronnie Rosenthal creates the goal for Ruben Attar to score a 90th minute winner to give Israel their first ever win over France.
But I was curious to understand how many major European scalps Israel had taken prior to 1994 away from Israel. This is the first competitive game Israel win away from home against a European opponent. Now, they did beat Yugoslavia in 1960 in qualification for the Summer Olympics. And from my research, I think that's classified as a senior team. But the Olympic Games in 1960, the football tournament, was very much an amateur competition. So you could dispute that Israel had beaten major European opponents away from home prior to 1994. And Yugoslavia went on and won the gold as well. So they were pretty decent. But prior to that, Israel have only won 5 friendlies before France. 5 friendlies away from home. So in their existence up until 1994, and that's against Finland, Greece, Malta, and Iceland. European opponents away from home, they're the only games. So it's a miracle of a result. And you can completely understand why they've invited Pelé over. That's a fantastic fact. That really is. The fact that they've got the champagne on ice, because it is going to be a party. Paris is going to party tonight. We're going to be at the World Cup finals.
But yeah, it's an absolute nightmare for France. They go into this last game. A draw is still enough against Bulgaria to get them to the World Cup. So not a complete disaster, but then they have already lost to Bulgaria in the group. And there is this kind of heightened tension in Paris because, it's not quite as simple as it was. Plus, at the same time, you've got these shenanigans going on behind the scenes where Penev and Kostadinov are getting smuggled into France because technically they're not supposed to be there. And it's Boris Mikhailov, who recently passed away, the Bulgarian goalkeeper, and Georgiev, the 2 experienced Bulgarian players, who I think at least one of them is based in France, to kind of get them into the country basically illegally to be able to play in this game.
I think this is such a brilliant detail. You kind of just take for granted that international football just works, because it generally does on the whole. But yeah, player visas are a thing. I mean, it may become a topic in the next couple of weeks as teams start to arrive in the United States. But you just assume that this is a formality. If there's an international fixture, players are going to get their visas. They're going to be able to do their job and leave the country, enter the country with no problems. But yeah, both it's Penev and Kostadinov. They don't have visas, do they? And it's the smuggling bit that's just fantastic, because this came out after the game as well. It wasn't like it was known before the game. It was a kind of like an after effect fact of the players that contributed to Bulgaria's success.
I was lucky this didn't actually have any effect on the result.
I'm jumping ahead. My apologies.
The fact that it came out after probably makes it even more embarrassing for France. But I do wonder if it creates this kind of siege mentality within the Bulgarian squad at that point. It's like, they're trying to keep you out of the country to stop you from playing. Whether that kind of galvanizes the team a bit more to try a bit harder. I mean, if it did, it didn't really show in their performance because I don't think they played particularly well. But as we shall see, things work out all right for them. But things don't start particularly well for them. But France are on the front foot, and it looks like instead of Ginola being the hero in the last game, this time it looks like it's Eric Cantona being the hero, scores, jumps on top of the advertising hoarding with arms aloft, and you think, again, that's the moment. Eric's come good. He's been fantastic in this group and got 6 goals. He's the hero. And then what do? They'd make the fatal error of immediately conceding an equaliser. Kostadinov heads in from a corner and back to all square for half time. So the nerves are going to start jangling again as they go into the second half.
And Houllier been a bit more conservative in this one, hasn't he? Against Israel, he's gone full on offensive with Ginola, Cantona and Papin all started. In this particular one, he's a bit more cautious. He's almost playing not to lose the game. The defeat is probably first and foremost in his mindset. And David Ginola, who has been contributing quite notably against Israel, albeit didn't do any good in that particular fixture, is benched for this one.
Yeah, it's Reynald Pedros, who's another figure of infamy in French football because he's going to be the guy who 3 years later misses the penalty in the shootout against the Czech Republic, which helps the Czech Republic through to the final of Euro 96 and sees France not get there. One of the kind of forgotten bits of the French football story as they build up to 98 is that that 96 team, which I guess we'll probably touch on in a bit later, but Pedros ends up becoming public enemy number one later on, but this time he has someone else to take the plaque.
Yeah, because Ginola may not start, but he definitely finishes this game.
Yeah, he does. He comes on for Jean-Pierre Papin in the 69th minute, and I think he's basically there to stretch the Bulgarians, use his pace to do that, something Houllier did quite a bit. And to be fair, like, Bulgaria aren't really doing a huge amount. This isn't France retreating. They're not super cautious, like backs to the wall, trying to hold on. Both teams are quite nervous and edgy. Neither of them are particularly going all out to attack. It's devolving into quite a scrappy sort of game. And to all intents and purposes, it looks like France are going to get their draw. They're going to qualify, all good. And then the most infamous moment of the game, which I feel like this is the fireworks factory that we're getting to now, which we've been building up to for the whole episode. France get a free kick in the far corner, pretty much the last minute of the game. They take it short. Ginola's got the ball in the corner, and you think he's going to be sensible. He's going to run it in the corner and, hold off the ball like any sensible player, even in the 90s. I know it probably wasn't as much of a big thing in the 90s as it is now, but they still did it back then. You just run down the clock and job's a good one. But no, he doesn't do that. That would be far too sensible for a French player to do. He does the most French thing imaginable, which is just lump the ball into the box, aiming for Eric Cantona, who is not anticipating it at all, because obviously he's expecting, like everyone else, he's just going to run it in the corner. So he's not on the end of it. Gives the ball straight back to Bulgaria. They very quickly launch the ball up the field. It comes to Penev, one of the two players who didn't get in. He knocks the ball over the defence to the other player who couldn't get in, Kostadinov, who's already scored once, smashes it into the net, and the French players just drop to the ground. The Bulgarian commentator screams, "God is Bulgarian." I mean, it's hard to argue, really, considering everything that's just happened. Complete and utter gift. Bulgaria go to the World Cup and France are staying in Paris.
Yeah, it's a crazy 20 seconds, isn't it? I mean, it's all happening with seconds to go as well. And this is in the day where added time was 1 minute or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It wasn't the nonsense you get these days with the 12, 13, 15 minutes. Yeah, it's just incredible. I remember at the time, and I remember it being a big story, even in England, but I couldn't remember how bad the cross was until I watched it again coming into this. And it's hopeless, isn't it? From a very creative player, he's doing probably what he would do hundreds of times a season and no one would bat an eyelid. But his timing is just so off.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent to the Iago Aspas corner. That's the modern comparison that I can think of. Iago Aspas, like with his dreadful corner in the last minute, the Champions League final. Yeah, it's that level of bad, but also like the consequences are a lot more severe than the Iago Aspas corner, in the sense of not only did France not qualify for the World Cup, but then everything that happens afterwards. So it's absolutely crazy, and you could just hear the complete desolation in the crowd at the time. It's the thought that it was the unthinkable thing, really. Like it probably wasn't one of those things that's spoken. And just another note as well. I know you said like it's a big story in England at the time. That's the thing that's quite interesting, that this night, the 17th of November 1993, I think Jonathan Wilson recently described it as the best night of football ever, because it's the same night as the Paul Bowden penalty miss for Wales. It's the same night as Davide Galtieri's goal against England for San Marino. You've got Portugal against Italy going to the wire. You've got Republic of Ireland snatching a late draw in Belfast against Northern Ireland, while at the same time Santiago Canizares is having the game of his life for Spain to stop Denmark from qualifying. And later that night, after it all finished, Argentina scraped past Australia to qualify in the playoff as well. It's all the same night.
Yeah, 17th of November, 1993. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible.
But you're absolutely right about looking at that clip again through sort of modern eyes, because you sort of know the drill. The two players, when they take the free kick, it's tapped short to Ginola, and you've seen this. Everyone knows the drill. Everyone knows what's going to happen here. Okay, yeah, it's going to be 2-3 minutes whilst he kind of... But of course, Ginola was never that type of player anyway. I mean, he's not the person you would expect to engage shields and hold it. Part of me thinks that had he attempted that, he'd have lost the ball anyway. Bulgaria was,
Yeah, and aiming for Cantona as well, who was just oblivious to it. Like,
yeah,
that's what surprised it. Maybe Cantona should have been allowed after the fact that Ginola was going to do that. But then the cross is so bad that even if he'd put himself in the right place, he wouldn't have got there anyway.
I can't even see what opportunity Ginola thinks he has seen. I mean, the cross is so bad that obviously makes it worse. But you kind of, when you view it back, you can't even really see, Cantona's in acres of space or anything. He's the only one in there. There's a fair chunk of defenders there. And Ginola whacks it way over his head.
It feels to me like Ginola is just following his creative instincts. I think he's just, and he's only been on the pitch, as James has mentioned, for like 20 minutes. So he hasn't played the full game. So maybe he's just following his creative instincts and thinks, I had to put one in there. Cantona could be the glory and finish it off for us, but it doesn't happen. And the image of him slumped against the advertising board as well. I mean, the magnitude of what's happened. I mean, he's spoken about this quite a bit himself, about Ginola, in terms of like what he's gone through. But he did look like a broken man. But the good news is he's got a supportive manager who's going to put his arm around his shoulder.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what sort of French manager would you have if they, said something absolutely absurd? I'm sure Gérard Houllier is going to take us in the most sort of understated way possible, and comfort the French nation, come up with some really nice words to soften the blow.
Yeah, it's fair to say that Houllier doesn't take this particularly well, does he? He absolutely hangs him out to dry.
I'll read you the exact quote from the book because it bears like the emphasis here. He set an Exocet missile through the heart of French football. He committed a crime against the team. And then when he resigned as manager, not long after, he said, with 30 seconds remaining, we were there, but we got stabbed in the back and at the worst possible time. So, very understated. And basically this then sparks this massive feud that goes on for the rest of Houlier's life. Ginola basically describes it as, his feeling of being haunted by it. Houllier just sticks the knife in again and again through the media, through his autobiography. Ginola attempts to sue him, but doesn't get anywhere. So yeah, it's pretty horrendous. They both really lose out from it. Even though I think, okay, it's awful football from Ginola, but he's not the first or last player to do it. Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's 10 other players on the pitch who did not stop any of those Bulgarian players from taking it up the other end of the pitch. It's a very easy goal that they score, really. When you've got the quality of players you got there, they're almost just like not switched on to that themselves, and yet they get away with it. Ginola gets chucked under the bus, and basically from this point, barely ever plays for France again. I think he gets like 1 or 2 more caps, even though we all know he goes on to have a fantastic career with Newcastle, with Spurs. And like Cantona, he has to go to England to reinvent himself because the French turn on him at home. And it's quite sad, really. Like, it's probably the second biggest disappointment of Ginola's career, behind not getting sold to Barcelona because Kevin Keegan keeps on hold of him and then sells him to Spurs. So he ends up at Spurs rather than Barcelona.
Yeah, and we'll come on to the wider sort of French story, but it is fascinating for these 3 main characters in it, Houllier, Cantona and Ginola, because it's a real turning point, isn't it? I mean, they all kind of have to go through some kind of recovery bit. Or Cantona less so, but for Cantona, it's a missed opportunity, isn't it? I mean, because we were looking at US '94, and when you look at the goal scorers in that tournament, it's like a who's who of football greats. It's kind of, it's every great player you can think of kind of the 80s, 90s, Klinsmann, Stoichkov, all these incredible players. And Cantona would be absolutely fitting there. And he was, as we've been talking about, he was at the top of his game.
Well, this is my hot take in the book. 1994 is a World Cup of talismanic players. There's so many teams in there that get dragged as far as they do by one talismanic player. They only win it with Romario. Italy, the runners up with Baggio. You get Stoichkov with Bulgaria go to the semis. You've got Georgi Hagi starring for Romania doing the same sort of thing. And I just kind of think that with Cantona and that French team, his personality was so suited to that same sort of role. And I can totally see an alternative history where France hold on for that last minute, get the draw. They slot in where Bulgaria do. They get a good run, go in. Cantona stars. And I think that squad would have come together over time. There was some really good young players who were just starting to come through. So Yuri Djorkaeff starts popping up towards the end of this. You've got Christian Karambo. You've got Zidane right at the end. Summer of 94, he starts coming into the team as well. So you start getting the real gems that help build that 98 team that goes on to win the World Cup. They're there. They're in the French scene. They're just starting to come through. And you think, but by the time they get to the World Cup, a few more of those players have been integrated. And Cantona would have been there leading them on with Jean-Pierre Papin. You think, well, they could have won it. I think they're the only team that didn't qualify for the World Cup, certainly of the ones that I covered in the book, that I can totally see an alternative history where they go on and win it. I genuinely think that.
Yeah.
That's just how fine the margins were for qualifying at that time. Obviously, with the playoffs coming in for 98, it is almost like an escape route for teams that don't quite make it. Still some great teams that didn't qualify, but it becomes a little bit easier. And yeah, I think that this France team is one of the big missed opportunities for European football. Whether they'd have coped in the heat in America, I'm not sure. That's the big question, but they had the players to do it.
James, I couldn't agree more. I think the way you set up in your book is fantastic. The parallel universe, where you talk about exactly what you've just gone through there. France qualified for the World Cup. Cantona goes on and wins the Ballon d'Or. And then we're debating the question is, Stoichkov, we never saw him on the world stage, at the biggest world stage. It's an absolute beautiful setup and it kind of grabs you immediately. And I totally agree with it. I think Cantona would have been the star man. I mean, it's if buts and maybes, and absolutely it didn't happen. But I think being in the United States as well, where everything is bigger and better and grander and the showbiz mentality, I just think collars up Cantona in 1994 would have been an absolute superstar. And I think it would have elevated him into a different space in the football chronicles of history. And I agree with you, James. I think, France, I think they would have won it. And we kind of have a little bit of evidence because both Sweden and Bulgaria, who France missed out to, finished third and fourth in this competition. So I'm with you 100%. I think it's the one that got away for France.
And they would have done it in those iconic shirts, the lost iconic shirts of these football, which is, for those of you who haven't seen it, you'll probably be familiar with the Spain shirt from that World Cup with the diamonds, the blue and yellow diamonds down the side of the shirt. Iconic look's been recreated since Spain had that in the kit a second time. France had that same template, except that the diamonds are in red and white. It looks fantastic. If they'd got to the World Cup, I reckon that would have been an absolute staple.
Yeah.
And yet it's kind of forgotten because it was only ever used in Euro 96 qualifying, basically. Imagine France winning the World Cup in that shirt with Cantona as the icon, popped up collar as well. Yeah, that's a fantastic image there. I'm just feeling so bad about it. Like I said, that's why this chapter in particular, this story was the one that kind of really got me into the idea of this as a book, because it's just so tantalizing. There's so many stories in there that are particularly tantalizing, but this one specifically, you kind of think, this team could have been so good. It was so close to being really good. And Cantona, I just feel like, even as someone who grew up as an ABUer, not a particular fan of Man United, Cantona was the first player I ever heard of. And I really respect his ability. And I think he's underrated now. There's almost like this kind of revisionist thing. It's like, oh, well, he was only good in the Premier League in the 90s because the Premier League in the 90s wasn't very good. And as soon as some of the other foreign players come in, and it changes things. No, I think he genuinely was a cut above, and you can see that. And he never really got a chance to show in Europe because of those restrictions. I almost think it's kind of going the other way now. I think we need more of an appreciation of how good Cantona was. It's a shame that he didn't have the evidence to prove that at international level.
Yeah, and it's pretty much the end of him as well, international levels. He does play for France, part of the 90, correct me if I'm wrong, 96 team, isn't he? I think he's in Euro 96, is that correct?
So what happens is...
he's banned from football.
Yeah, you've airbrushed that out, Jamie, haven't you? Airbrushed that out ever happening.
I just remember January 1995. Yeah, so absolutely. So he doesn't go to 96. And then by the time in 1995, after he served his 8-month ban and he's back playing football, France have discovered the brilliance of Zinedine Zidane, as you touch on in your book, James. And I think that's the end of Cantona. And he retires from football in 1997, from football permanently. He decides he's not going to get picked to go to 98. And I think the ego of the man is, well, I'm going to end it and control it myself rather than being told I'm not going to be part of that squad. And he's not, because the whole team now is centered around one of the world's greatest footballers that's ever been, Zinedine Zidane.
Yeah, exactly. Emile Jacquet actually makes him captain initially after the failure to qualify, and initially tries to build the team around him. But as you say, he doesn't play for France again after the ban. I think his stock in France takes a bit of a hit, even more than it did in England in some respects, because I think there was at least an appreciation in England he was a great player, whereas in France they never really liked him anyway. So by the time he comes back, it's Zidane, it's Djokayev. You're starting to get the basis of that team. Plus, Jacquet, as a manager, was a lot more cautious than Houllier anyway. I'm not a massive fan of the 98 team that wins the World Cup. I think if you look at their results, they weren't particularly exciting. They win a couple of times in the groups, but actually Jacquet then changes the team and makes him more cautious for knockout stages. They were lucky to get to the final, really. They rode their luck a lot. Like, just so happens that Lilian Thuram had the game of his life in the semi-final.
Did they beat Paraguay on the famous or infamous silver goal?
Golden goal.
Was it the golden goal?
Golden goal, yeah. And they beat Italy on penalties. They got it, obviously. It was an incredible result for them. And in the iconic shirt that you're wearing now as well, which is definitely a big part of my childhood. But yeah, like Zidane himself doesn't have a particularly good World Cup. He gets sent off in the group stage. Doesn't really do an awful lot up until 2-headed goals in the final, which was a real rarity for him. But the true France team that I really appreciate from my childhood was the 2000 team, where Roger Lemay comes in and he's a bit more, he lets them off the leash a bit more. They play a bit more expressively. They have Henry and Anelka up front as a proper partnership. They've got other attacking players who come in, like Trezeguet and Wiltord. Jacquet institutes this kind of cautiousness, which I think is what you see in French football now. I mean, we've been suffering Didier Deschamps as the French manager for the last decade and a bit, not taking off the handbrake. And I think Deschamps has undoubtedly been influenced by Jacquet, because at the end of the day, he was Jacquet's captain after Cantona got banned. You can see it in the way he manages that team. And I respect his achievements in terms of what he's done, but I also think France has underachieved since then. Well, I wanted to turn this into my personal opinions on French football ever since. I think that's the thing with Houlier's failure, is that it sets in motion this kind of culture of French cautiousness at international level that we still see carry on through this day. And it's why, I'm going to make a claim that could age really badly. I don't think France are going to win this World Cup in 2026. I'm struggling to see how they do it with the way that Deschamps manages the team. Now, some of you will be listening to this in a few weeks' time, and you'll probably be throwing rotten vegetables in the great French tradition at me. I think if France get to 94 and do well in 94 with a more swashbuckling style, suddenly French football looks very different.
And actually, it's sort of happening with a few of these sides, isn't it? Because Brazil win the World Cup in 94 in very kind of non-Brazilian fashion, and they've probably never been Brazil again since. That was probably the kind of the last time. The irony is that it's Germany who reinvent themselves as suddenly the kind of most entertaining side in Europe, a kind of 10 or so years after this.
Well, it's like France become Germany and Germany become France, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very true.
France are the team that, although even then, like the thing with Germany in the 80s and 90s is that they play badly and still get to the final or the semis. There have been a couple of occasions where France haven't even done that, like when they got knocked out by Switzerland in Euro 2020. Yeah, even that analogy is wrong. But yeah, I'm just hope that whoever the next France manager is, maybe it'll be Zinedine Zidane. I think that would be a good appointment for them. Hopefully it'll be someone who will allow the great players that they have to express themselves,
That side can do so much more. I think it's a side that's capable of winning the World Cup.
Yeah, it's tricky though, because the stakes are so high in international football now in the World Cup. Caution is always going to be, you're going to see more and more teams playing pragmatic and more cautious than you are playing with this expressive nature. I mean, Germany in 2014 were a joy to watch because, as you rightly said, Grant is very young German, but they were fun to watch. I do agree with you, James. I don't think France will win this World Cup, but I think this is the hardest World Cup to predict going into 2026. I think the size of the thing is just incredible. I think the gap between the best and the worst is probably the most narrow. Maybe there are a few teams that have qualified that will get steamrolled, but I think if you look at the top 32 teams, so when you get to that round of 32, can't they come up with something better than that, the round of 32? I just think we're going to see a lot of cautious football, a lot of games going into extra time, probably more penalty kicks deciding fixtures in this World Cup than before. And I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it's entertaining, and I hope the heat does play a part and does create a bit of lethargy in the game. And, there's more errors because the more errors in a game, the more fun it is to watch.
When it's straight knockout football, when things are going to penalties, it's fine margins, isn't it? And we've seen that with this coming back to that France team. 96 they lost on penalties in the semis, having won on the penalties in the quarters in the Euros, playing that sort of cautious football. 98 golden goal win in the second round, penalty win in the quarters, narrow win in the semis. It's fine margins. That's the big thing for me. And you look at international football throughout the history of it, is that because everything comes down to one match so often, it's so difficult to predict, and that's why we enjoy it so much.
Yeah, definitely so. Before we do get to the ranking, we should probably just mention Houllier. I mean, we know what becomes of Houllier because he turns up at Liverpool, but he resigns at the end of this, doesn't he? But he's still involved in sort of the French national side.
Yeah, I think he goes back to his technocrat role. I think he almost kind of swaps with Jacques, because Jacques is assistant and technical.
Yeah.
They kind of swap roles. Houllier goes back to the technical side and helps oversee, again, that kind of formalisation of Clairefontaine, and the first Clairefontaine players start coming through towards the end of the 90s, like Nicolas Anelka and Thierry Henry. Obviously, that plays such a huge role in modern international football and modern football generally, in the sense of having these academies that produce elite players. France are the first to it, and they get the benefit from it pretty early on. You see them having good teams right the way through the 2000s with the basis of players that have come through Clairefontaine or other academies. Houllier himself, as you say, he eventually returns to club football as joint manager of Liverpool with Roy Evans, which is, again, an early memory of mine is that whole arrangement and how badly it went. And then Houllier, by the end of 1999, is the permanent manager of Liverpool, and he does a pretty good job. They don't win the league, but they get their version of the treble with the two cups and the UEFA Cup. Never quite kicks on really from there, and then has that stint at Villa, which was a bit weird. Then obviously he sadly passed away a few years ago, but he still left his mark as one of the most important figures in modern football, and a manager who was still very successful in terms of the number of trophies he won. I think that missing out on that World Cup in 94, it just leaves a bit of a gap in his CV, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely so. Okay, we should get to ranking this side. This is virtually impossible to rank, I have to say. We have 5 categories of greatness, from all-time greats to the top true greats, our second tier, touch greatness, our mid-tier category, edge of greatness, and then blinkered greats. Jamie, I'll let you go first on this. You can try and give us some guidance on. I suppose to some extent, are we ranking what this side could have been, or are we ranking what they achieved?
That is the question. I mean, we're literally ranking a team that failed to qualify for a World Cup final, as finishing third in their group behind Bulgaria and Sweden, and losing famously to Israel at home, who they'd never lost to before and who had never beaten European opposition away from home in a competitive fixture. So on that basis, we're not ranking much, but the romantic story is, and as James has put it in his book, the parallel universe is, and as you said, look what you could have won. I reckon they could have gone quite far, as we've already spoken about. But having said that, I mean, I'll be doing an injustice to our tier system if I put them in anything other than edge of great, which is the 4th one. I think I struggle to even say touch of greatness because they didn't even qualify for the World Cup. So I think, they've shot themselves in the foot. David Ginola's right foot in particular. And edge of greatness, I think, is the best I can muster to kick us off.
James, what do you reckon to that?
I'm fully in agreement. They clearly had potential there. They had some good results. They beat some good teams in Austria and Sweden. It wasn't an easy group. And, if those last 2 matches had played out differently, even if you kind of exclude the whole what they could have done in America from it, that's still a good achievement. And you've also got the context of them having been good a couple of years before. Clearly the potential was there, and they have enough results to back that up. So yeah, there is a little bit there, but they're very much on the cusp of greatness. So yeah, edge of greatness it is, I'd say.
I think that works well. I mean, you can make, I think it just fits the wording so perfectly. I mean, you could make a case of them being blinkered greats, but they never really touch greatness. That's the whole point of this story. And edge of greatness, just as you say, I quite like cusp of greatness. We might add a 4.5 category in cusp of greatness. Question is cusp higher than edge? I don't know, but that will be our summer project. But I think we have to say France 1994, edge of greatness. James, that has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. It's been really good. I've really enjoyed covering this team in a bit more depth, because we've just had a lot of fun talking about it, and there's so much to talk about along this story and what happened in the years since as well.
They're a pivotal team, and this is a pivotal period, albeit that they don't do anything. But you have these two periods where you go from one era of a great team and the rebuild. But it's interesting. Had it all worked out for them, had Cantona start at the cup, would Zidane's career have been another 4 or 5 years off? Because Cantona would have carried on playing France, as we saw with Platini. They, once they found a talisman, they stick with him. And you might have had Cantona playing for. And you can't really imagine Zidane and Cantona necessarily clicking in the same side.
That's just too much charisma. Zidane, Cantona and Ginola on the pitch, I think, would have opened up a hole in the space-time continuum. There's just too much charisma.
Definitely charisma overload.
If you don't mind, just the indulgence, just from your book, No Shows, if we weren't to do France, which other team would you have loved to have been talking about? Or maybe a teaser for a future episode?
I think there's a couple there. There's Trinidad and Tobago in 1990. Fantastic story, fun team there. Nearly the first time that they got to the World Cup. Unfortunately, they had to wait another 16 years after losing to America in the decisive game, which is a really important game in the history of American soccer as well. It's the time they got back to the World Cup. And also lots of kind of background details that you can read more about in the book. As well, there's a couple of really interesting, slightly sad stories or very sad stories. Zambia team that nearly qualified for the 1994 World Cup, which is almost two teams, because the first team gets wiped out in a plane crash. They rebuild the team and they nearly get there, and then they get to the Africa Cup of Nations final. Really fascinating story. And then a team that I love as well, because I think it's underappreciated, is the Ireland team that nearly qualified for the 1982 World Cup. Probably the best Ireland team ever in terms of overall ability.
That's
the
the
earlier
amazing
version of the
generation,
France
isn't it?
team that we talked about earlier, the Platini era, they beat that team at home. Unfortunately, they were robbed both in Paris and in Brussels by really dodgy refereeing decisions, which was a regular occurrence for Ireland at that time.
Yeah, that's something they get used to.
And it all fell apart after that. Unfortunately, Owen Hand never quite managed to get the magic again, and he ends up being replaced by Jack Charlton, who has them playing in a very different, more effective, but perhaps slightly less attractive way, and ends up getting the success off the back of the work that he did. So there's a few tasters for you.
Yeah, I like it. So that 82 side, would that have had Liam Brady in it? Would that have been?
Yeah, it was all built around Brady. It had Frank Stapleton in it, Mark Lawrenson, David O'Leary, lots of really well-known faces, Chris Hughton. And then they played really good, attractive, attacking football. They weren't cautious. They went out and attacked the really talented teams up against the Dutch as well. I forgot that's sort of late era good Netherlands. Yeah. And on the subject of the Dutch as well, another team I can throw in, the 2002 Netherlands side, which is one that always gets brought up when I talk about the book. The people always say, oh yeah, that team was really good. It had loads of really good players in it. But actually, it ended up being quite dysfunctional. I think they really missed Dennis Bergkamp. And they go out to Ireland, because Ireland have quite a good record against the Dutch somehow.
Absolutely surreal. Excellent. Okay, well, there's a couple of points. This will definitely be taking you up. We will be trying to get you back on to talk about one or two of those teams, because they're absolutely glorious teams. But James, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yep, been great.
Excellent. Jamie, thank you as ever.
You're welcome. I didn't really do much tonight. Thank you so much, James, for making this a really easy one for me. So much appreciated. I just, love listening to your storytelling. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's great, the fact that you're enjoying it. So, it's available from all good retailers, and support your local bookshop.
Excellent. That's great stuff. We will be back with our last World Cup setup episode. We are doing our Barbarians pick of a team coming up with who the best team of players who aren't at the World Cup. So that's next time. See you then.